rejected Omega tamed the Alpha King. Now he refuses to let her go. Lena Caldwell had always known she was different. Not in the way that made wolves proud. Not stronger, not faster, not louder than the rest. She was different in the way that made her invisible. She was an Omega, the lowest rank in the Ashwood pack, and everyone around her had spent years making sure she never forgot it. She had learned to live quietly. She woke early, worked hard, spoke only when necessary, and asked for nothing. She told herself it was enough. Most days, she almost believed it. And the night of the blood moon ceremony, she stood in the clearing with the rest of her pack and waited. The red moon hung heavy in the sky above the trees. Around her, wolves were finding their fated mates, laughing, crying, reaching for each other with trembling hands. Lena watched and waited, and held her breath. Then Derek stepped forward. Derek Ashwood was the beta of the pack. Tall, broad-shouldered, respected by everyone. Lena had known him her whole life. She had never allowed herself to hope. But when the bond pulled her toward him, and she felt his name rise in her chest like a sunrise, something in her cracked open wide. For one moment, standing in the red moonlight, she felt what it was like to belong somewhere. Then Derek looked at her, really looked at her, and his face changed. "I, Derek Ashwood, reject you, Lena Caldwell, as my fated mate," he said. His voice was steady and loud enough for everyone to hear. "You are an Omega. You are beneath me." The clearing went silent. Then came the whispers. Low at first, then spreading like water across stone. Someone laughed. Someone else made a quiet sound of pity that was somehow worse than the laughter. Lena stood very still. She felt the bond snap, a sharp, clean pain in the center of her chest, like a branch breaking in cold weather. She breathed through it. She lifted her chin. "Rejection accepted," she said quietly. She turned and walked away. She did not run. She did not cry. She walked steadily through the trees, back toward the small cottage at the edge of the pack territory, and she began to pack a single bag. She was gone before sunrise. 3 months later, Lena was living in Ironhold City, the capital that sat at the heart of all 7 packs. It was neutral ground, governed by no single pack but ruled overall by the Alpha King, a man most wolves spoke of in low, careful voices, the way people spoke about storms or fire. Lena had found work as a healer's apprentice. She was good at it. She had always been good at quiet, careful things, listening, observing, noticing what others missed. The old healer she worked under, a woman named Edda, asked no questions about where she came from or what rank she carried. She only cared whether the work was done well. Lena made sure it was. Then the sickness came. It started in the lower quarter of the city, where the Omegas and low-rank wolves lived in close, crowded streets. A fever that didn't break. A weakness that spread from one household to the next. The healers who came from the upper districts looked at the patients, shook their heads, and left without treatment. Lena stayed. She worked for 3 days without proper sleep. She studied the pattern of the illness, the way it moved, the symptoms it left in its wake. Something about it bothered her. It was too consistent, too deliberate, as if it had been designed. She pushed that thought aside and focused on what she could fix. On the 4th morning, she had a treatment that worked. She didn't announce it. She simply began administering it, quietly and carefully, and within 2 days, wolves who had been burning with fever were sitting up and asking for water. Word reached the palace faster than she expected. King Caelan Voss arrived at the healer's hall on a gray afternoon, with 6 warriors at his back, and an expression that suggested he expected to find the situation disappointing. He was taller than Lena had imagined, not that she had imagined him. He wore no crown, but he didn't need one. Authority came off him the way heat came off stone that had been in the sun all day. He looked around the room. His eyes moved past Lena twice before settling on Edda. "Who developed the treatment?" he asked. Edda pointed at Lena without hesitation. Caelan looked at Lena properly for the first time. Something moved across his face, brief and controlled, gone before it fully arrived. "An Omega cannot have done this," he said. It wasn't cruel exactly, it was simply how he saw the world. Lena was very tired. She had not slept properly in 4 days. She met his gaze without blinking and said, "And yet, Your Majesty, Your people are breathing." The room went completely quiet. Caelan studied her for a long moment. Then he said, "You will come to the palace. The sickness is moving toward the upper districts." It was not a request. Lena looked at the patients still resting in cots around her. She looked at Etta, who gave a small nod. She picked up her supply bag and followed the king out into the gray afternoon without another word. The palace was everything Lena had not grown up with. High ceilings, warm light, hallways that smelled of cedar and cold stone. It was also, she discovered quickly, deeply unwelcoming to someone of her rank. The court members looked through her. The warriors made space for her, the way people made space for furniture, moving around her without acknowledgement. One nobleman laughed openly when he heard why she had been brought in. An Omega healer, in the royal palace. What was the king thinking? Lena had spent her whole life being underestimated. She knew how to work inside that. She kept her head down, did her job, and let her results speak in the language everyone eventually had to respect. She and Caelan disagreed often. He gave orders with the assumption that they would be followed without question. Lena followed the ones that made sense. When they didn't make sense, she said so, not with anger, not with submission, but with a calm precision that seemed to confuse him more than defiance would have. He was not used to being handled that way. His sister Mara was different. Mara found Lena in the healer's wing on the third day, sat down on the edge of a supply table, and said, "You're the one who talked back to my brother in front of his guards. I've been wanting to meet you." Lena almost smiled. "I didn't talk back. I made a factual correction." "In this palace," Mara said cheerfully, "those are the same thing." Mara became the first real warmth Lena had felt in a long time. She was honest and kind, and entirely unbothered by rank, in a way that felt almost radical inside those walls. She visited Lena every day, brought her food when Lena forgot to eat, and treated her simply as a person, which, Lena realized quietly, was a rarer gift than it should have been. Meanwhile, Caelan kept finding reasons to be present when Lena was working. He told himself he was overseeing the situation. She was an outsider, with no verified credentials. It was responsible governance. He did not examine this reasoning very closely. She began finding a cup of warm tea outside her door on the nights she worked late into the evening. There was never a note. She knew it was him anyway. She had noticed that he drank the same blend, and that it always appeared exactly when she had forgotten to rest. She didn't mention it, neither did he. 3 weeks after her arrival, Lena found something that changed everything. She had been studying the pattern of the illness carefully, tracking which households were affected and in what order. The pattern was wrong. Natural sickness spread in circles, outward from a point of contact. This one moved in lines, along specific streets, through specific water sources, skipping buildings that shared walls with affected ones. Someone had put it there deliberately. She brought the evidence to Caelan that evening, a careful map of the spread, her notes written in the small, precise handwriting she used when she was being exact about something important. She laid it on his desk and walked him through it without introduction. He was quiet for a long time after she finished. "You're certain," he said. It was not quite a question. "Yes," she said simply. He looked up at her. For the first time since she had arrived, he was looking at her without the filter of rank or assumption between them. He was just looking at her. "All right," he said. They tracked the source together over the following days. It led them out of the palace and into the older parts of the city, through narrow streets and past buildings that the upper district pretended didn't exist. Caelan moved through them without ceremony, without his guards, at Lena's request. Too many guards would warn whoever they were looking for. They found the supply point on a cold evening in a storage building near the eastern gate. They were not alone inside it. The men who came out of the shadows were large, organized, and had clearly been expecting someone to eventually find them, just not so soon. There were 4 of them. Caelan handled the first 2 with a speed and force that Lena had understood intellectually, but had not quite prepared herself for. The third one went past him toward her. She had spent her whole life being underestimated. She moved sideways, used his momentum against him, and bought herself enough time for Caelan to reach her. But the 4th man was already there, and the blow that came down was meant for the king. Lena stepped in front of it. She felt it across her side, and went down onto one knee. Caelan's voice said her name, said it the way it had never said it before, without distance, without authority, just her name, in a voice stripped of everything else. Then she was in his arms, and he was moving, and she was fairly sure she told him she was fine, and that he didn't need to carry her, and she was fairly sure he didn't respond to that at all. She woke in the palace healer's wing. The ceiling was warm gold in the lamplight. Caelan was sitting in a chair beside her bed. He wasn't wearing his outer coat. His hair was slightly disordered. He looked, for the first time since she had known him, like a man who had been frightened. "The bond revealed itself," he said, when he saw she was awake. His voice was controlled. His hands were not. They were very still in the way that meant they were being held still on purpose. "When you were hurt, it opened." Lena was quiet for a moment. "I see. You are my fated mate," he said. She looked at him steadily. "You don't have to honor it. I know how you feel about Omegas." Something in his face shifted, not dramatically, not in the way of stories, but in the quiet way of a man who has looked at something he believed for a long time and found it hollow. "I was wrong," he said. She said, "I know." Then she looked at the ceiling for a moment and said, "What do you want to do about it? Not what the bond demands, not what the law requires. What do you choose?" He stared at her. In 30 years of being Caelan Voss, Alpha King of 7 packs, no one had ever asked him that. Duty had always spoken first and loudest. He had never been asked what the man underneath the king actually chose. He found, when he looked honestly, that he knew the answer. He had probably known it for longer than he was comfortable admitting. "You," he said. "I choose you." The court did not receive the news well. Lena had not expected it to. She stood in the great hall and listened to men with ancient titles use careful language to say she was beneath consideration, beneath the role, beneath the kingdom's dignity. Then Derek arrived. He had heard the news and traveled to Ironhold quickly, presenting himself to the court with a revised version of events. He had been under pressure the night of the ceremony, he said. The rejection had not been fully intended. There were grounds to revisit the bond. He stood in the throne room and looked at Lena with an expression that contained, she noticed, no actual regret, only the particular kind of interest that appears when something previously discarded suddenly has value to someone else. Caelan went very still beside her, in the way that meant something entirely different from calm. Lena put her hand briefly on his arm, then she stepped forward. "You rejected me in front of our entire pack," she said. Her voice was level and clear, and carried easily through the high-ceilinged room. "I accepted the rejection the same way. That bond has been closed for 3 months. She looked at him for a moment, just looked at him, without anger, without pain. "I want you to know that I'm grateful. I mean that honestly." She turned away from him and didn't look back. The weeks that followed were not easy. The conspiracy was exposed and dismantled. A faction within the council that had been poisoning the lower packs to create instability and weaken Caelan's authority. Several court members were removed. The city began to heal. Lena began to build something she hadn't expected, a real healer's program, open to wolves of every rank, the first of its kind across the 7 packs. She worked on it with the same quiet determination she brought to everything. And Caelan showed up. Every day, in small ways. He sat with her in the evenings. He asked her what she thought about things that mattered, and then actually listened to the answers. When court members spoke over her, he redirected the conversation back to her without making it a performance. He learned that she liked cold mornings and strong tea, and complete silence when she was reading. He provided all 3 without announcement. One evening, she told him about the blood moon. Really told him. Not the facts of it, but what it had felt like. The silence afterward. The walk home. The single bag. He listened without moving, without trying to fix it or explain it away. When she finished, he said, "I can't undo what was done to you, but I can spend the rest of my life making sure you never have to question whether you're wanted. Not by me, not in these walls." She cried for the first time since she had left Ashwood territory. He didn't say anything, he just stayed. On a quiet morning some weeks later, he found her in the eastern garden at dawn, sitting on the low stone wall where the light came in first. He sat beside her without speaking. After a moment, she leaned against him. He wrapped his arm around her and held on. He had ruled 7 packs. He had survived wars and councils and decades of being the hardest man in every room. But nothing had ever asked more of him than the choice to stop letting his pride speak louder than his heart, the choice to reach for someone the world had told him was beneath him, and discover that she had been, quietly and without effort, the strongest person he had ever known. He held her in the morning light, and thought that he would make that choice again tomorrow, and the day after, and every day that came after that. And he did.